So we're aiming to accomplish a couple of things in today's video. We are going to firstly create some impulse responses of some new warehouse speakers that I got. So I got the Veteran 10, or I guess they call it the Veteran 10, but it's a 20 watt speaker, 10 inch. That's going to go in the SC20 in place of the VT Junior. And I have their version of a greenback called the Green Beret, and that's going to go in my 212 cab, which is currently outside down on the ground floor. Got cables running out there because we're going to do those IRs outside, because in the past I've gotten good results that way because you don't have so much of the room tone. It's a little bit more anechoic unless you've got a really well treated room, but this room at the moment is extremely bare, as you can see, so it's going to be too echoey. So we're going to do that one outside. I've got a nice long speaker cable running out there, as well as two mics going to my RME interface here. Second thing we're going to do is we are going to use two different power amps to send the sweep. We're going to use the Waza amp expander and the effects return, aka the power amp of the SC20. That way it's an attempt to bake in the impedance resonance of the cab, or bake in the reactive portion of the IR into the IR by using a tube or valve power amp. So that way I want to see if we can get a slightly better sound using the cheap resistive load and the IRs that have the baked in reactive sound to them, compared to using an expensive reactive load with regular IRs that have been done with a solid state power amp. To my understanding, an IR is just a map of input to output frequency. Hence why we normally use a sine wave sweep to generate the response and then deconvolve the sweep from the recorded audio to leave behind the map, as it were. As IRs are level independent, it is essentially just a complex EQ curve, so in theory we should be able to replicate the reactive component simply by baking it in. Just a brief run through of the recording setup. Harley Benton SC552 into the Marshall. Currently got it set like this, but we'll probably bring the gain up as we go. We're going into the Waza TAE, into the interface, and then we're looking through all of the impulse responses in the session and recording that audio. Okay, so this has been quite a fun process, but also incredibly tedious putting all this together, but I'm happy with the results now. So just to recap, we took impulse responses of my Marshall 1936 cab, as well as the Tweed Champ, just because, as well as the SC20 with the new Veteran 10 speaker in it. And we did most of the impulses outside because sometimes you can get a more anechoic recording that way unless you've got a really well treated room. And then you can just add room tone and reverb onto that later. But I do like to get a nice semi-anechoic speaker capture for the IRs. I do think that makes a difference. So what I've done is, just to show you, the program that I use is called Voxengo Deconvolver. Deconvolver. So you can create your test tone with this. We went with a 96 kilohertz 32-bit float sweep, and they have different ways that you can configure it. So there's one option, reverse technique, which we did investigate, and we'll just have a look. It's on their website. It details what each of these things do to the output. So reverse technique switch enables an alternative method of performing deconvolution. This method works only for responses captured using sine sweep test tones created with Voxengo Deconvolver. so supposedly better quality, and minimum phase transform. So what we did is I created two different sweeps, one with the reverse technique and one without, and I've essentially captured so that we can A/B, because we've got all this data, and I wanted to quickly go between, say, so this one for example, K-MD-F-SC. That means it's the K100 speaker, it's the MD421 mic. It did use the fade technique, so reverse technique, so it needs a fade on the sine sweep, and the power amp in use was the SC20. And I've got that track paired up with the SM57, so every single pair is just MD421 and SM57 50-50 blend, because that sounds pretty good. I've got them all grouped as well, so I can solo that pair. And then if I want to quickly A/B that against just one change, so here's fade and NF no fade, I just solo that and we can hear both of those. So and now going to the fade. So I did this for quite a few of the different speakers so that we can compare, for example, the K100 might sound better with the fade, whereas the greenback might not. And I wanted to check that. I can already tell you, having gone through and played around with this, that doing the fade, the reverse technique with the fade on the sweep is worth it. And the other thing I did was all of the tracks here, I've written a comment here. So minimum phase transform was on for the top set, and it ends down here with, that one is the Veteran 10. So if I just want to compare Veteran 10, MD42, so you got both mics, no fade, SC20 was the power amp, that sounds like this. And then if I just want to compare that with minimum phase transform off, it's just this pair down here. It's subtle, but it does sound a bit clearer when you have the minimum phase transform on. So I came to the conclusion that in the future, I am always going to use both of these options in Boxengo, reverse technique and minimum phase transform. Both seem worth it. I always have the normalize option on just because it makes life easier. I tend to leave the cut slopes, the EQ alone, because you can do that later, but I might investigate that at another time. So just to run through this in a bit more detail, because we do have so many tracks here, so you can see I've captured all the IRs here. Let me just zoom in on that. These are all the impulses, and then they get deconvolved essentially to remove the sweep from the recording. And then I've opened an instance of Fog Convolver, which is my IR loader, on every single track with the respective IR. Don't worry about the fact that they're stereo. That was an accident. It doesn't really matter though. You're still just hearing it in mono. Everything's panned to the center. So just going into the other variables involved in this. So we've got K100, pair of mics, fade technique, SC20 was the power amp. If I want to hear that by changing to the Wuzzer amp expander, that'll be this pair here. Everything else stays the same. And you'll notice that it's a bit darker. I think I had the presence knob way too high on the SC20 when I made them. So probably set it to the middle if I do these again. But the TAE ones do sound better to me because they're a bit more balanced. The SCs can be a little bit too bright, I would say. And then down here we've got the Tweed Champ, both mics, fade technique, SC20 is the power amp. I didn't do that one with the TAE. It started to, oh actually, let's have a look. Yeah, it did start to rain, so I had to kind of hurry things along, but not to worry. It does sound really scratchy like an 8-inch champ speaker. And That one without the fade sounds like this. Next speaker we had was the G12 Vintage. That's the original speaker in the 1936 cab. Hear that with minimum phase transform off, that will just be this one here. Oh, wrong one actually, that'll be, yeah, sorry, that one. It just sounds a bit thinner without the minimum phase transform. Just to make it clearer where it starts blue again and below, that's all minimum phase transform off. So the greenback impulse will be this one. That's the Green Beret from WGS. And that'll be both mics, fade technique, SC20 was the power amp in use. I think that's going to sound better with the TAE power amp. Hear that with no fade. So I do think it sounds better every time with the fade when it was used. And now if we want to do some pairings, I might have to be careful with the volume levels here, but let's just hear that one again. So that's quite bright. Let's pair that with something slightly darker, so now we're going to have two speakers. We're going to do that with the K100 probably clipping there. Might just bring that output down a little bit on one of them. So now we're back to just the original K100. So it's probably a bit too bright, but it's not. You can definitely work with it and maybe just tone that down a bit with EQ. So overall, I do think this is quite valuable, just knowing that when I make any more impulses in the future, I will use reverse technique. I won't even really have to think about it. I will use a minimum phase transform. It seems like there's no downside. Last thing is we'll swap the WGS TAE out for a resistive Bugera PS1 load, just to see if the IRs created with the SC20 as the power amp, because you'll have that reactive element in the IR. We'll see if it makes much difference. So in this example, it seems that the ones made with the TAE, even though it's a solid state power amp, they sound better because they're not overly bright. But yeah, we'll see how it sounds just swapping out the load box now. if I were using these in a mix, I would almost always blend a couple of speakers together. Might try, say, the Champ, maybe blend that with the Greenback. Possibly a bit too bright, I think. Let's go with this one. And not the Champ. Let's go K100 and the Greenback. Just plugging into the low input now. So yeah, I hope that all makes sense. Let me know in the comments if it doesn't, but it's just a good way of capturing a bunch of data and then A being different variables because we have enough IRs where we just changed one thing. Check out Voxengo Deconvolver, I highly recommend it, I've used it for years. Just a very simple way to make your own impulses because it's got the test tone generator built in. Everything's very straightforward and they're nicely explained on here. And yeah, I think that just about covers it. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.